Today in this video, we're going to be learning all about how to make a sourdough starter from scratch. And we're not just going to be learning about how to make one sourdough starter, but two. You don't have to make both, but I'm going to be showing you along the way how to make one with all-purpose and whole wheat flours, as well as how to make one with rye flours. And this is just so that you are informed on which type of flour you would like to use in your starter, and so you can understand the differences of the two along the way. Just so you're aware, starting a sourdough starter from scratch can be anywhere from 7 to 14 to 21 days or more. It really depends on a myriad of variables within your kitchen. Things like your temperature, if it's warm, if it's cool, if it's drafty, if it's muggy, if it's dry, if you're at elevation. So all kinds of different things come into play. Also, what types of flours you're using, not just whether it's rye or whole wheat, but the brand itself, if it's fresh, if it's old, the type of water you're using. So everything kind of comes into play here. So just so you're aware, give your starter some patience and just really practice just giving it those feeds and giving it time. If you think it's ready, go ahead and give it a float test. And if it fails that float test, it's okay. Just keep on feeding and I promise you it will come around. I've gotten stories, emails all the time from people whose starter sometimes takes a month or more to get started. So just hang in there. It's worth your while. And remember that eventually, a few days down the road, we can start using the discard in our baking recipes. And we'll talk about that on those days. Because it can be a long process, instead of showing you what we're gonna do every single day, I'll just be highlighting the moments every 2 to 3 days along the way. I'll be letting you know which day we are in the process, what my starter looks like, what it smells like, what you should be looking for. If you're looking for something really clear-cut, like a day-to-day instruction with very descriptive details, then a good place for you to go is over to courses.leavenly.com, where I have a free course over there called Trouble-Free Sourdough Starter. And you can take that for free. You can head over and sign up right now. And it's a text-based course, and it will walk you through the process from day one to day whatever it takes for you. This video is intended to be a nice, short, quick video. So let's go ahead and get started. Real quick, we'll talk about what we're gonna need. So you'll need some wide mouth mason jars, just like this one. I love these and I always have a few on hand. And also the lids. So they come with the entire lid with the rim part, but I only ever use this inner part. I just set it right on top, then it lets gases escape and won't let any yuckies fall inside. You're gonna need just some spoons for mixing up. You can use a fork if you like. And I also always have these little spatulas on hand for scraping down the sides of our jars. You're also gonna need flour. So for flour, just any kind of rye flour will work when you're doing the rye starter. And if you're using the all-purpose and whole wheat starter, just any kind of all-purpose unbleached flour if you can, and just a whole wheat flour, as long as it's whole wheat, you're good to go. So we don't have to get too specific or too crazy on those ingredients, just whatever you have, whatever you want to use, that's great. In terms of water, you're going to want to use warm water, just warm to the touch. I'm not going to go into detail about what temperature you're going to want it at, because I don't want you to fixate on that. It just needs to be warm, not hot, not cold. Very simple, very easy. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we're all set to start mixing our starters for day one. So the first one we're gonna do is the regular all-purpose and whole wheat starter. I just wanted to show you my scale. I've already pre-weighed out my ingredients so you guys don't have to watch me weigh everything. This is just a simple digital scale I got off Amazon. It's really thin and I've had this thing for about 4 or 5 years and it's awesome. So a digital scale is a must when you're baking with sourdough and especially when you're building a starter. But I'll put that aside for now because I've already weighed out my ingredients. So first we're going to do the all-purpose and whole wheat starter. So I've weighed out all my flour and water. What we're going to do is 100 grams of each. Okay, and just so I don't spill everywhere, I'm going to go ahead and scoop this in here. So just remember, you're always going to want a 50-50 blend. So that's in the jar now, and then this is 100 grams of just warm water. I use tap water because our tap water is great. I've heard that some people have a hard time if their tap water is very soft or also very hard. So if you're aware that that's an issue for you in your kitchen, you could go ahead and give it a try and see if it bothers your starter and see if you might have slow results. Or if you want to just kind of skip that headache altogether, you could just buy bottled water or use filtered water. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to be stirring this up. So what I'm doing is I use the handle of a big spoon just because it's really solid, and this is just what I've always done. Frankly, it's just my habit. So it's up like this, I grab onto it in my fist, and then I can really stir it really, really well and make sure that all of that dried flour is mixed up. So you're gonna wanna really dig down into the corner, well, they're not really corners, but you know what I mean, into the bottom of the jar, and just like that. And scrape down what you can using your spoon off the edges. Try to keep it a little bit neat, but that's why we have the little spatulas. So go ahead and get that wet. That'll help not stick to the spatula so much, and scrape down those sides. So just like this. And so you get a whole bunch off on the spatula. Scrape it again. And this is just to keep your jar clean so you can kind of see the activity of what's going on. And later, when there's lots of activity, so we can be better able to measure the height that we gain when our starter is nice and active. So this is our all-purpose and whole wheat starter. I'm just gonna go ahead from this point on and call this our regular starter, okay? Because this is what people regularly use. You're gonna want to name yours as well. This is just regular, or maybe we'll call him Reg for short. So this can be Reg, there, he has a name, because you are more likely to feed your starter if you give it a name, and that has been proven in studies. So like I said, just use the inner lid of the mason jar, put it on top, and just leave it like this. Then I'm gonna show you how to do the rye starter. And as you can imagine, it's the exact same process. So 100 grams of rye flour, 100 grams of water into our jar. So again, I pre-weighed this out, and I'm using Bob's Red Mill dark rye flour. That's my preference. I can find it easily at Whole Foods, which is just down the street from me, so it's very convenient. And then go ahead and add your water. Then you're going to use your spoon, just like before, use the handle end of your spoon and give it a good stir. Just make sure that there's no dried flour left. So you can see at first it's really quite easy to stir, and then toward the end it gets a bit harder. And then I'm going to scrape the edges off, the sides off, as much as I can with my spoon. And then I'll come along with my spatula, kind of scrape off that spoon if you need to. Get all that goodness in there, and scrape down your edges. So it's gonna be a lump just like this, pretty much for the next couple of days. So now what we're gonna do is, again, we'll put our lid on, but I encourage you to keep the lid off for a little while, okay? So try to leave it on your countertop with the lid off for a few hours. You might notice on the top that it's getting a little bit dark, almost like a skin forms on top, but that way it helps introduce microbes from the air into your starter. So that is day one. It's just that simple. Go ahead and set these aside, and I'll be checking back in with you guys in a few days, and we'll see where we're at that point. Now guys, I do just want to take a quick minute and talk about the importance of keeping notes, because you're going to want to be recording observations that are really important to pay attention to with your starter. So I've already started mine. This is what my notes look like right now, and this basically has my regular starter details here and my rye starter details here. Now at this point, there's not really any notes to take about our brand new starters. They smell quite sweet because they were just fed. And smell is going to be a factor that we're going to be paying attention to a lot in these videos, okay? So obviously there's not really any smell to note, there's no rise to note, but that's what you're going to be paying attention to. So get yourself a little notebook or a piece of paper, or just write it on your phone, whatever works for you, and keep track of your details, because it's going to help you figure out what you're doing, and maybe also where you're going wrong, and also track changes that you're making and be able to figure out what worked for your starter. So definitely take notes. You're gonna hear me say that a lot in this video. Okay, welcome back. This is actually day 4, and I'll explain why. Day 1 is the day that we mixed our actual starters up on the video before. Day 2, I left them just so that they could have time with their lids off and let lots of microbes get in the jar. Day 3, I fed them, and I'm gonna show you how to feed them in this video. But what I did is I fed them 50 grams of starter with 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. So I'll be demonstrating that in just a few minutes. And at the time, I didn't see any visible rise in my starters beforehand, but about 10 hours later, they were doubled. And this Rye Starter, you can see it like exploded out of the jar. It was coming down the sides. So first of all, let's start with our regular starter, okay? I'm gonna put my Rye Starter over to the side, and we're gonna start by just observing, okay? So we take off the lid and we look inside. Now I'm seeing some liquid on top. That's called hooch, and that is totally normal with starter. This is fermenting, and this is actually becoming fermented alcohols on the top. So what we're gonna wanna do is just pour that off, okay? And then we're gonna take 50 grams of this and put it in our other jar. First I'm gonna take a smell of it. It smells kind of yeasty, almost like a beer smell. Nothing too sour yet. I don't smell anything sour. It almost still smells a little bit sweet, even though it's got that hooch on the top. So I'm gonna go ahead, grab a new clean jar, put it on the scale and zero it. And then I'm gonna dump off this hooch here in a cup I have to the side. And I'm gonna go ahead and pour 50 grams of this starter into my jar. And you can see it's pretty liquidy. And that's gonna be a big difference between this starter and the Rye Starter. So it's about 50, I got 53, but that's close enough. Then we're gonna add 100 grams of water to this 50 grams of starter. This is pre-weighed out, just like before. So you just dump that in like this, and then what I do is I swirl. I give this a good swirl to incorporate. This won't work with the Rye Starter. We'll do a different technique with that, and just swirl it till it's pretty much all dissipated. Then we're gonna add our flours. So this is the flours, the 50 grams all-purpose flour, 50 grams whole wheat flour. So a total of 100 grams of flour. I'm just gonna scoop it in so I don't pour it all over the counter and make a big mess. Okay, and then we're gonna stir that all up. So like before, I use the handle of my big spoon because it's nice and firm, and we're gonna stir. And about halfway through, you're gonna grab on really tight because it's gonna get hard to stir, and that's normal. And again, scraping down the edges, down in the bottom, all along the sides, getting that dried flour off, and keep stirring. And scrape off your spoon. And then, as before, we're gonna use a small little spatula, which I got just dunked in water, and scrape down your jar. And this is important now because you might be starting to see some rise, just like I did. So what we're gonna do is, after the video, I'm gonna go ahead and put on an elastic band right at the level of the starter, where it is, right here. Or what you could do is use a whiteboard marker and make just a line. So then you can see visibly how high your starter is rising. So you'll see a line, and then you'll be able to see how high it's come. So that is our regular starter, fed, and I can tuck him away for a little while. Then we'll do the Rye Starter. So I'm gonna grab my scale again, new jar and zero, and then first we're gonna make some observations about our Rye Starter. So obviously, my first observation is that it exploded out of the jar. You can see that it's quite a bit thicker than the other starter. It smells like really healthy rye flour. I'm not sure how else to explain that. Really kind of nutty smell. And definitely no sour smell yet. And it's lowered to about here. And when I fed it, it was just a little bit lower. So it's still up a little bit. The top is a bit dried. I'm not sure if you can really see that on the video, but there's some dried skin there. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a spoon and just kind of scoop out that dry stuff. That is not harmful. It's not gonna hurt anything. Just the top part like that, just because it's harder and it's not going to work as well when we're implementing it into our new starter. So make sure your scale is zeroed. Then you'll see, look, I'm not able to dump this out, right? It's not runny like the other starter. It's not even budging when I turn it upside down. It's like a Dairy Queen Blizzard, it doesn't come out. So we're gonna have to use our spoon. So make sure your scale is zeroed and just plunk some in there. See how much this spoonful is. See, it's very sticky. So that was 29 grams. And these are all observations that you're gonna be making and taking notes on, okay? You can write that it's really sticky, that it's thick, anything that it reminds you of. It's gonna be a little bit too much, I think, 57. I'm gonna scoop out a little bit of that. I'm okay going over or under a couple of grams, but 57 is a little bit much. So it's 51, that's great. Okay, so now we can put our scale aside and go ahead and feed just like before. So I'm gonna add my 100 grams of water here. And then we can't exactly swirl this to incorporate it because it is so thick. You'd be here swirling all day long. So I recommend just stirring it up. So I'm gonna actually I'll use this nice clean spoon here. I'll use this end of it and we'll stir this up. And you're not really gonna want it to disappear completely because it might not, but just to break it up and really incorporate it into the water. That's all you're looking for. Just so that it's easier for you to mix the flour in. And just like that, looks perfect. Then we're gonna add our flour. And again, this is 100 grams of rye flour. And I have the bag here, I can show you. This is the rye flour that I use. It's the Bob's Red Mill Dark Rye. Just got that at Whole Foods for a few bucks, so nothing crazy. And traditionally, rye flour starters become more active more quickly. And then once they're balanced later down the road, as we'll talk about, you will be able to switch it to a regular all-purpose and whole wheat flour if you want to. So again, I'm going to use this handle to stir this up because it's nice and strong. Get my hands dirty a little bit here. And the rye flour starter is always much stiffer and harder to stir. So just something for you to be aware of. And again, getting into the bottom, scrape that all out. Make sure you scrape the sides down as much as you can. And that looks great. All right, and then we're gonna take our spatula, get it a little bit wet, and scrape the sides down. And that's it. So you can see that this guy is quite a bit thicker, right? He's still not moving around very much. You could tip him upside down, he's not gonna go anywhere. So we're gonna go ahead and put his lid on. Actually, just kidding, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this lid first and then I'll put it back on. And gonna set these aside and I'm gonna check on them tomorrow. And I'm going to feed them tomorrow. I don't have any plans for this week, so I'm going to be feeding every day. And just remember that if you want faster results, you can be feeding yours twice a day even, just so long as you believe that it's peaked and has started to fall. If it's still rising, I would not advise feeding yet. So good luck with your starters and hang in there, keep feeding. All right guys, so here we are on day 8. It's already been 8 days, if you can believe that. And I want to show you my progress that my starters have made so far. But before I show you my starters, I want to bring up a couple of points that I might have missed talking about up until now. So first of all, remember that the process is flexible, okay? And I think I mentioned that earlier, that one day I missed a feeding because we were busy with the kids. It's gonna happen, okay? It's not a big deal. Don't throw your starter away and don't beat yourself up. Remember too, if you can feed once a day, think about maybe feeding twice a day as well. That's an option for you too if you want to expedite this process. So I hear from a lot of people a lot of challenges what they are dealing with their sourdough starter, especially when they're first building it like we are. So one common challenge is that there's been a lot of activity the first couple days. I'm seeing it rise and fall and it's amazing, and then all of a sudden that stops. Okay, and so I want to address that. What's happening there is that it's the wrong kind of microbes that are thriving, and they're actually starting to die off because the right type of microbes are actually starting to build up. So that's what's happening. Your starter is trying to achieve a balance inside, and the right type of microbes are called the lactobacillus, and that's what we want to thrive. So if this is happening to you, keep feeding. Don't be deterred by that. Don't throw away your starter. Don't think it died, because it didn't. It's just trying to work its things out on the inside, stuff that you can't see. So just keep feeding, and I promise you in a few days' time you'll start to see that rise and fall again. If you're having no activity whatsoever at this point, also don't freak out, and also don't throw your starter away, okay? Keep feeding your starter. Just keep feeding every day, twice a day. Just keep going, because eventually it will kick in and it will become active. One thing to remember is when you see these videos that we're making starters and we're baking sourdough, we are baking a lot in the kitchen, and so our kitchens are full of yeasts. Whether or not we can see them or realize that they're there. Even things like flour dust, you know, maybe even some kind of contaminant from my current starter somehow wafted across the room. I don't know. So I'm just telling you that because when I am filming this video, my starters, my 2 starters I have right here, are far more active than any starter I've ever built beforehand. Especially when I was first starting out and I hadn't baked before, my starter took a long time to become active, okay? So just stick with it and just know that you're doing everything right. Just keep on going. If you're seeing minimal rise, like a little bit of rise but not much, that's great. Again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but just keep feeding. Don't throw away your starter, just keep going because it will work, I promise you. If it has a weird smell, that's a good thing. If it has a really gross, disgusting smell, that can also be a good thing. If it's really offensive, then again, I'm gonna say feed it, because when you feed it, it refreshes it, and it might just need more feedings more often. So again, if you forgot a day or 2, no big deal. Just keep on going, keep feeding, get back on track, no big deal. We all fall off the wagon. So I wanted to show you my starter. So we are on day 8, like I said, and I fed these guys about 15 hours ago. So it's about 12 o'clock in the afternoon now. I fed them at 9 p.m. last night. So here is my regular starter. You can see that it's risen quite a bit above the rubber band. You can see there are bubbles inside along the sides, and if you can look inside without it all tipping out, because it is very, very thin, you can see bubbles on the top there as well. The bubbles look small and kind of watery, which I know from my experience, that's a sign that it's hungry. So it's gonna wanna be fed soon. So I'm probably gonna feed this guy before 9 o'clock tonight, and it smells very, very, very slightly sour, but not really sour. Like if I smelled my Goldie, my current starter, you can smell that sour smell. This has a very, very faint sour smell. It's mostly a sweet smell. And it's like a flowery smell, I guess, like a flower smell, not like an outside flower smell. So that's what this one smells like. That's what this one looks like. So if you're doing the regular starter, that's about what you can expect. But remember, it might not have risen this high, and that's okay. Okay, I assure you it's okay. Just keep going, and you'll see activity soon, I promise you. Now let's take a look at our Rye starter. This guy is out of control. So I know just based on the past few days that he's going to continue to rise even more, and he's going to basically come out of the jar on top, or just about. And it's amazing to see that happen. So you can see this starter is full of thick, great big bubbles. It's more than doubled in the jar, because this is our elastic band here. So it's more than doubled, and it is very, very thick, just like before. It's kind of like a Dairy Queen Blizzard. It's not going to go anywhere. Even if I tip it, it just doesn't really move. And as far as smell goes, I'm not getting any hint of sour smell whatsoever. It's more of it's still just that kind of sweet, nutty smell. And remember, this is 15 hours ago that it's been fed, so these guys are going to be ready for feeding soon, within a couple hours before 9 p.m. I would say. So these are our starters. They're coming along really nicely, and I'm going to just go ahead and feed in a few hours, just like I showed you in the video. We're going to take 50 grams of the starter and mix it with 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Same old thing. I don't need to show you that on repeat, but I did want to go over those challenges with you, because if you're at this point and you're saying this isn't working, just please stick with it, keep feeding. Okay, and that's all I have for you right now. Stick with it, keep feeding, and I'll see you guys in a couple days. Hi guys, and welcome to day 12. We're already at day 12, if you can believe it or not. So we're gonna go ahead and look at our starters. So our Rye starter looks like this now. So it's got nice thick bubbles. It's already risen and fallen. So this is ready for a feed. This is what it's going to look like when you come to it and it needs to be fed. So you can tell that it's already risen. You can see the kind of the lines on the side of the jar there, where it's risen and then it fell. So it's about here where it rose to, and now it's down about here. So it's still quite a bit above the rubber band, as you can see, but it's fallen a bit. So this is our Rye starter. Then our regular starter looks quite a bit different. So it is lower. That's the first impression. The second impression is that it's a bit hard to see bubbles on the outside, but again, remember, this is ready for feeding. So it's not full and fully risen and active. It's ready for feeding and it's really hungry. And I can tell that because on the top, there's some liquid on the top. If you can see that, it's very, very thin and watery, and I see very thin bubbles on the top. So first, let's talk about our regular starter reg. So I'm gonna take a smell and let you know what I smell. So I smell very small hint of sour smell, and mostly just like a wheat smell, like a fresh wheat smell, with a hint of sour. So nothing offensive, but not overly sweet either, like it smells when I first feed it. So that's a good sign. I take that as a good sign that there's a little bit of sour smell in there. And again, the texture is really, really runny. It's really hungry. So I'm gonna go ahead and feed him now. And same with our Rye Starter. So I know he's hungry. He is very thick, same thing as earlier, kind of like peanut butter in there. Won't pour out if I tip it upside down. And the smell, I'm smelling a little bit of sour smell, and I noted that actually on day 10. So a few days ago, I noticed a bit of a sour smell in my Rye Starter. So this, I think, is ready to be fed. Again, you can see the bubbles on the outside. It rose substantially and it's still quite high. So these are ready for feeding. And the next time that it peaks, I'm going to go ahead and do the float test with both of them. And the float test, in case you're not familiar, is we're going to take a glass of water and we're going to scoop out a little bit of the starter and put it on top of the water. If it floats, then it means that our starter is ready to bake with. Probably. It might not quite be 100%, but it's there and we can give it a shot. If it sinks to the bottom, it's not quite ready yet, and we'll just keep on feeding until we pass that flow test. So that's going to be the next video that you see, is the flow test. I'm going to go ahead and feed these now. If they're ready in the same day here, day 12, I will float them on day 12 and record it for you. And if not, then I will go ahead and record it tomorrow on day 13, and we'll take a look and see if they pass the flow test. Now, I just fed my starters and I wasn't planning on filming right away afterwards, but as I was feeding them, a couple of things occurred to me that I wanted to mention to you guys. At this point, you can use your starters in discard recipes. So all this time we've been throwing away our starter, and now you can start to use that discard in your recipes in things like pancakes, waffles, pretzels, rolls, anything that you find that requires discard. Go ahead and use it unless it's required as the leavening agent. So the way to know that is if you look at a recipe and it calls for sourdough starter as well as something like baking soda, baking powder, then you're good. But if it only calls for sourdough starter, then that's probably a sign that it is used as the leavener, and your starter discard is not strong enough yet to leaven a recipe. So you need to rely on baking soda and baking powder for those. So go ahead and look for recipes, play around a little bit. There's a ton of stuff you can make. There's a link below to my curated post on my website of a ton of different discard recipes that you can make. So have a look through that as well. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about is if you are making a regular starter, you'll notice, like I just showed you, it's quite thin and watery, right? So at this point, you can play with increasing your starter ratios. I'm gonna stay with mine at a 1 to 2 to 2, just for simplicity and to keep it the same across the board. But go ahead and play with it, and play with a 1 to 3 to 3, or even a 1 to 4 to 4. So for example, if you wanted to bump it up to a 1 to 4 to 4, you would do just 25 grams of starter with 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour. So that's going to take more time for the starter to work its way through to eat all that new nutrition, and it's going to be less watery and be less thin on the top. So if you're kind of struggling with that, if your starter's really hungry all the time, or if you're getting hooch on the top like I am, go ahead and bump that ratio up. Just play with it and you can be confident in that. Take notes along the way, and just keep an eye on your starter and feed. So I just wanted to add those few things in here. I just thought of them, and yeah, so we will go ahead and wait for these starters to rise. Once they're at peak, we will do the float test and I will show you what that looks like. Okay, it's been about 6 hours since I fed my starters, and this is the regular starter here, and this is the Rye Starter. And so you can see on the sides that they're nice and bubbly and active. I won't hold up my regular starter, but it looks the same because it would come pouring out of the jar, right? Nice and active. You can see that it's doubled past the band. So I'm curious if at this point my starters are going to pass the float test. And the float test is an indication that our starter is ready to bake with. So we're gonna go ahead and just give this a shot. I don't know in advance, by the way, if this is going to work. I haven't tried it yet. So we're gonna we have a spoon and a glass of water, and this is just room temperature water. And the reason I got the spoon wet is so that when I scoop it out and I can slide the starter off into the water, and I don't need to push it, because if you push it off the spoon, it's going to pop all those CO2 bubbles in there, and then it's gonna sink. So it's the gas bubbles that are gonna help it float. So we wanna try to keep those intact as much as possible. So we get our spoon just a little bit wet, and then I'm going to scoop a little bit of the starter into my spoon, about like a half a spoonful, just like that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and slide it into my water. Now what we wanna see is a float, yay! So our red starter is active and ready to bake with. So that is so exciting. I did not know if that was going to happen. Sometimes it might look like this and it might not pass the float test, which is okay. It just means, you guessed it, keep on feeding. All right, so let's go ahead and test our rye starter here. So you'll see that this one is quite a bit thicker, and I'm gonna actually kind of push some of this surface stuff aside very, very gently because it's so thick. Get this wet again and scoop some of this good stuff underneath. Just like that. So again, if this floats on the top, it's a success, and if it sinks to the bottom of the glass, then it is a fail, and we'll have to try again later. So very gently give that a little shake to see if it'll come off the spoon. And there we have it. That is a fail. You see how it went to the bottom of the glass right away? So our rye starter is not quite ready, and that's okay. We're just gonna keep feeding our rye starter, but I'm gonna go ahead and call the regular starter finished. And I might actually bake a loaf or two with this one. I have my regular starter right next door over here, but I might try to make a sourdough loaf or two with this one. But again, our rye starter isn't quite ready, so I'm gonna feed him for a couple more days, and we will check back in a few days and redo this float test with him until it passes. Okay, so here we are 2 days later with our rye starter that I've been feeding. You can see that it's nice and happy. It's bubbly. It's more than doubled above its starting point right there at the elastic band. And it's got a little bit of a sour smell now, which is pretty new. So we're gonna go ahead and see if we can float test this starter and see if it will pass like our other starter did. So same thing, we have the cup of water, a wet spoon. I'm actually gonna scrape a little bit off the surface, kind of pull that back, just because it's a little bit dried out and I don't wanna get a false negative on my test. So my spoon is wet. I'm gonna scoop down, get a small amount there. I got a little bit more than my other starter, but that's because this rye starter is quite a bit thicker. And then so we're gonna go ahead and place that in our water cup, and we're gonna see if it floats. Ta-da! There we go, our rye starter is ready. And now that you have 2 starters, or probably just 1 starter that's completely ready and ready to bake with, you don't need to feed it every day. You can reduce the amount that you're feeding it, and you can also store it in the refrigerator in between bakes and just feed it a few times before you plan on baking. So that's what I usually do. I keep mine in the fridge. That is a past float test. Now you know what it looks like. So that's exciting. Let's get baking. So this concludes our how to make a starter video. You learned a ton in this video. We went over things like how to mix a regular and rye starter, how to feed and when to feed, as well as when to use your starter in discard recipes, when to know when your starter is hungry, how and when and why to do the float test, and so much more. Remember, at this point, you can change the feeding ratio and the schedule to something that works better for you and your life. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up below. Definitely subscribe to the channel for more helpful videos and tutorials like this. And if you're any point in your journey along the way, leave me a comment below and let us know how it's going or how it went. Maybe what obstacles you ran into or what things you found made it easier. So now it's time to jump in with both feet and start baking. My favorite recipe is down below for amazing sourdough bread. But if you live at elevation like I do, then you're gonna wanna use the high altitude bread recipe, which which is also in a link below. Please let me know how your journey is going with a comment, and I can't wait to hear from you. Happy baking!